Before we dive in, if you think you can handle the dark truth lurking behind the doors of ordinary neighborhoods, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and comment below, because this isn't just a story, it's a nightmare you're about to witness. The quiet streets of Vero Beach, Florida were fractured that night. Streetlights flickered across manicured lawns, casting long, thin shadows that seemed to slither along the sidewalks. A chill hung in the humid November air, the kind that made even the most mundane suburban houses feel ominous. It was here, inside the gated enclave of Bermuda Club, that a mother's desperate request would spiral into tragedy. Deputy Terry Sweeting Mashkoff, a 25-year veteran of the Indian River County Sheriff's Office, parked her cruiser at the edge of the driveway. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a scene that should have been routine. A locksmith preparing to change locks, a woman trembling with worry, and a man, her son, who wasn't supposed to be violent, at least not publicly. Michael Halberstam, 37, lived alone in the house, but had spent recent weeks in heated arguments with his mother. Neighbors spoke of screaming matches, doors slammed in anger, and strange posts on social media that hinted at paranoia, but nothing had foreshadowed what would happen next. The deputies thought they were just handling an eviction, another call in a month filled with domestic disputes, and nothing more. The air was thick with tension, a static that made hairs stand on end. Terry's instincts told her to tread carefully. She motioned to the locksmith to move forward, and together they approached the front door. It was supposed to be a quick, calm entry, a standard civil matter. But the moment the lock clicked open, the world exploded. The first gunshot rang out like a cannon, echoing through the silent street. Terry dove to the ground as another shot tore into the shoulder of her fellow deputy. The locksmith screamed, stumbling back, his hands pressed against a wound that painted the driveway red. Panic surged, adrenaline burned hotter than the Florida night. Michael Halberstam had armed himself, waiting inside. He fired with precision, his face twisted in a mixture of fear and fury. The deputies returned fire, their shouts mixing with the wails of sirens approaching from down the street. It was chaos, a collision of professionalism and horror. Terry, the veteran who had faced criminals countless times, was hit, fatally. Her body crumpled on the front porch, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Investigators would later piece together the moments leading to the massacre. The mother, clutching the edge of the doorway, could barely comprehend what had just occurred. 7 emergency calls had preceded this night, but none had predicted the final deadly confrontation. The son's record was clean, legally permitted to own firearms, yet nothing in paper could measure the storm brewing inside him. But the scene was far from over. Among the debris of shattered glass, spent cartridges, and other turned furniture, detectives found something curious. A hidden notebook tucked under the sofa cushions. The pages were filled with cryptic writings, diagrams, and obsessive notes about his mother, the deputies, and even future revenge scenarios. The discovery sent a shiver down every spine at the crime scene. This wasn't just an impulsive act. It had been planned, carefully, meticulously, and worse, it hinted that the full story was far darker than anyone imagined. As the paramedics rushed the wounded to the hospital and officers cordoned off the street, one question burned in everyone's mind. Why? Why would a son open fire on those trying to help his own mother? And when detectives flipped to the final pages of that notebook, what they found would change everything. The storm of sirens faded, leaving only the groan of the Florida night as investigators combed the crime scene. The air smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and fear. Terry Sweeting Mashkoff's body had been removed, but the weight of her absence hung like a shadow over the neighborhood. Officers whispered among themselves, their faces pale beneath the flickering streetlights, each haunted by the memory of that first gunshot. Detective Marcus Hall, a seasoned investigator known for his meticulous attention to detail, was called in immediately. He crouched over the scattered notebook, reading the meticulous scribbles with a growing sense of unease. Names, dates, and cryptic warnings scrawled across the pages painted a picture of obsession. Halberstam had been watching his mother's movements for weeks, cataloging every interaction, every perceived slight. Every detail, Hall realized, pointed to something far beyond a simple domestic dispute. The locksmith's injuries were critical. As Hall examined the scene, he noticed something else, a series of footprints leading from the back of the house into the thick woods behind the property. They were smudged, but deliberate, like someone had planned an escape route. Could Halberstam have had an accomplice? Or worse, had he intended to vanish into the night and strike again? The mother, still trembling, sat in the back of a patrol car. Her voice was barely audible as she recounted her son's increasing paranoia. He said people were watching him, that I was plotting against him, the deputies, everyone, she whispered, her hands shaking. Hall listened carefully. Every word was a piece of the puzzle, a potential key to understanding a mind that had gone dangerously off track.
By the next morning, the hospital was buzzing with activity. The other deputy, wounded in the shoulder, was recovering but unable to speak in detail. The locksmith clung to life, his vitals unstable. Hall knew time was critical. He couldn't afford to wait for the injured to recover fully. The notebook suggested that Halberstam's mind was methodical, perhaps even anticipating the investigators' next moves. Then came the first shock. Digital forensics revealed that Halberstam had deleted months of social media activity and email correspondence the night before the shooting. But fragments remained. Cryptic messages to unknown recipients, maps of the neighborhood, and references to final confrontations and those who interfere. Each discovery added fuel to a fire Hall hadn't expected. This was not just a son lashing out. This was a carefully orchestrated vendetta. Detectives began interviewing neighbors. Most described Halberstam as quiet, almost reclusive, but others remembered subtle warnings. The garden gate left open at odd hours, figures seen peering through windows, the distant echo of muttered threats. One neighbor handed over a grainy video captured by a home security camera. In the footage, Halberstam could be seen walking near the driveway, pacing, staring at the street like a predator marking territory. By late evening, Hall had connected the dots. The eviction request was not merely a trigger, it was a calculated incitement. Halberstam's obsession with control, his fear of losing dominance over his mother, had escalated over months into lethal aggression, and the notebook hinted at more: plans, contingencies, and potential targets beyond that night. The real horror came when the detectives turned to the last page of the notebook. Scrawled in jagged handwriting was a single chilling sentence: "They think it ends here, but the story is only beginning." It wasn't just a manifesto, it was a warning. Hall felt a cold dread settle in his chest. Halberstam might be dead from the officers' return fire, but the notebook suggested he'd been working on something deeper, a plan that perhaps involved others, or it left seeds to grow after his death. And when Hall found a carefully folded photograph hidden between the pages, depicting an unknown man standing in the shadows near the family home, he realized the investigation had only just scratched the surface. As the sun rose over Vero Beach, painting the suburban streets in soft gold, Hall couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Somewhere in the silence of those manicured homes, secrets lingered, waiting for someone foolish enough to uncover them. And one question burned hotter than ever: who else was involved? And what had Halberstam really planned? The calm of the morning belied the darkness that still hung over Bermuda Club. Hall stared at the photograph, the same question echoing in his mind. What if the killer wasn't working alone? Detective Marcus Hall spent the next hours poring over every detail, every clue. The photograph found in Halberstam's notebook became his obsession. The man in the shadows was unidentified, yet something about his posture, the angle of his head and the faint glint of metal in his hand screamed danger. Hall's gut told him this wasn't a stranger passing by. This was someone Halberstam had trusted, or feared. Meanwhile, forensics uncovered more chilling details inside the house. Hidden compartments beneath floorboards contained weapons, surveillance equipment, and letters addressed to multiple individuals. Each letter was precise, instructing someone to watch, wait, and act if interference occurs. Halberstam's plan had layers, traps, contingencies. It was frighteningly methodical. He hadn't just targeted his mother and the deputies. He had envisioned an entire scenario of retaliation, a blueprint for destruction that extended beyond his own life. Then came the breakthrough. A neighbor remembered seeing Halberstam meeting with someone in the weeks leading up to the eviction. Surveillance footage confirmed it. The shadowed figure from the notebook photograph had visited the home repeatedly, often late at night, always leaving just before sunrise. Hall realized with a chill. Halberstam had not acted alone. He had an accomplice, someone who might still be out there, orchestrating the next phase of the plan. Authorities issued alerts. Every exit from Vero Beach was monitored. Yet the accomplice remained elusive, moving silently, waiting for the chaos to settle. Hall and his team retraced Halberstam's steps, piecing together a trail of digital breadcrumbs. Emails, encrypted messages, even deleted posts began to form a map. The accomplice wasn't hiding. They were planning, calculating. Then, in a quiet, nondescript storage unit on the outskirts of town, the team found him. Or rather, found the evidence of him. Dozens of weapons, bulletproof vests, and a diary detailing the final mission that Halberstam had promised to complete. But the accomplice had vanished. Hall realized the horrifying truth. Halberstam's plan wasn't just about revenge, it was about legacy. Leaving someone to finish what he started. The mother, now recovering from the shock, revealed the secret that shifted everything. Years earlier, Michael had confided in her about a man he'd met during his military service. They had shared secrets, grudges, and plans long before the mother-son disputes. The man was out there, and he was still capable of acting. Fear gripped the investigators. They weren't just chasing a criminal. They were chasing a specter of someone who had learned the deadliest lessons from Halberstam. Hours turned into tense days. Hall's team monitored phone lines, financial transactions, even utility records. And then a call came from a remote cabin near the coastline. A single word was whispered into the phone. Finished. The accomplice had vanished again. But not before leaving a final note addressed to the mother. You took him from me. Now you'll know the cost. By now, the investigation had become a psychological labyrinth. The law had stopped one killer, but the terror had multiplied. Hall stared at the mother, who trembled at the thought of what might still be waiting in the shadows. The case had ended in court for Halberstam, but its aftermath had only begun. Weeks later, Bermuda Club returned to a semblance of normalcy. Yet neighbors spoke in hushed tones about shadows in the windows, strange noises at night, and the lingering fear that the accomplice had not vanished at all. They thought the danger was over, but true crime, Hall realized, doesn't close neatly. It leaves scars, secrets, and a gnawing question. What else was planned, and who would be next? And if you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the truth hiding in plain sight. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because in true crime, the story never really ends.